Hey, this is Josh Alexander with Orange County Housing Market News, and this is your August 2020 Housing Market Update. So let's get into it. So if you live in Southern California, you know it's been extremely hot outside over the last week. So not only are we stuck indoors because of COVID-19, now we can't go outside because it's just too hot to go out. And if you're a parent like myself, you kind of have the trifecta of bad news, because if your kids can't go outside, that means they're inside. And if they're inside trying to get their energy out, they're going to be bouncing off the walls. So I'll be lucky to get out of this without any broken arms or any broken furniture. Why am I talking about the weather and a housing market update? Well, because I want to make a cheesy real estate reference. So just like we're having a historic heat wave right now, the housing market is still historically hot. So we're still in an 8-year high for how hot the seller's market is right now, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. So today we're going to be going over a few things. One, we're going to talk about the general housing market in Orange County as well as in Southern California. Then we're going to break that down to what it means for a buyer and what it means for a seller, depending on what side of the fence you sit on. And then I recommend staying tuned until the very end as well, because I'm also going to be talking a little bit about some things you might be seeing in the news. For instance, the foreclosure crisis and how that's going to impact the housing market. So stay tuned for that at the very end, because I'll go over that as we wrap everything up. So let's go ahead and start with the general market update. Okay, so over the last couple weeks, we really haven't seen any significant shift in either supply or demand, especially compared to what we saw during the beginning and the middle of the pandemic, where numbers were changing rapidly from week to week. Everything's really starting to stabilize. So if you look at the housing data, and if you've been listening or reading articles about the housing market, you'll know that one of the bright spots of the economy during this whole pandemic has been the housing market. Because yes, we had that initial shift down, but everything went back up pretty quickly. And over this last week, we kind of got the final piece of the puzzle showing that all three of the major parts of the housing market have made that quick V-shaped recovery. So purchase applications, which show how many people are going through applying for loans and getting ready to buy a home, have made that recovery. If you're looking at homes that have sold, we've made that recovery. And then finally this week it came out that housing starts, or people that are looking to actually start building houses, have also made that V-shaped recovery, and all of them are basically back at or higher than the pre-pandemic level. So the housing market has come out of this whole pandemic and it is now back on track to where it was before everything happened. So there's a couple other reasons why everything has been so stable. One of them is because at this point, we're really starting to enter the same time of year that everything starts to slow down for the housing market anyway. So that's when kids go back to school. So if your kid hasn't gone back to school yet, they will be over the next couple weeks. So what does that mean for buyers and sellers? Well, if you're a seller, especially because a lot of the schools are going back only virtually at this point, do you really want to go through and have people going through your house, doing inspections, appraisals, you having to go and move everything, all while your kid's trying to do this virtual learning and try not to fall behind in school? A lot of sellers with families are taking that option, saying, we're not going to put our house on the market, or if it is on the market, we're going to take it off the market until we get towards the end of the semester. And on the demand side, it's the same thing. A lot of buyers don't want to go out and purchase homes and move their kids in the middle of the school year because of everything going on. So traditionally this time of year, you start seeing that decline in both supply and demand, and they both decline about the same rate for the rest of the year. So wherever we are right now, in terms of what the market is, which is a hot seller's market, we're expected to be that way for the rest of the year. And the final reason we're really starting to see the market stabilize kind of goes back to that V-shaped recovery in terms of how much COVID-19 is impacting buyers and sellers. So at the very beginning of this, we saw everything drop, and then buyers really started, that demand has started to increase much faster than sellers were willing to put their house in the market, which is why that transitioned us in such a hot seller's market, because demand was sky high, inventory was still extremely low. Well, at this point, let's say look at July, for instance. July, we actually had more homes put on the market this July than we did last July. So COVID-19 is also no longer affecting how many people are putting their homes on the market. So at this point, demand isn't affected by it, supply isn't affected by it. So now we're back to a point where the market is going to be more traditional in the way we finish out the year. And because we've been in such a hot seller's market, I'm predicting that we're going to stay in a hot seller's market for the remainder of the year. And like I said, that has nothing to do with how many people are putting their homes for sale now, but it has everything to do with the backlog of homes that weren't put for sale during those first couple months of the pandemic. So for instance, in Orange County alone, between March and July, there are about 4,200 homes less that hit the market than they did last year. So that's 4,200 homes that people couldn't buy, which kept supply extremely low. And if you look at Southern California in general, about 27,000 homes from the months of March through July were not placed on the market that were placed on the market last year. And that is why we're going to be in such a hot seller's market for the remainder of the year, because as we get into the fall market, supply starts going down. It's not going to be going up further, so those homes are going to be harder and harder to come by. So really something dramatic would have to change in the economy that really affected the demand level to get back to anywhere close to a balanced market by the end of the year. So I'm predicting that we're going to be staying in a hot seller's market all the way through the holiday season, and there's a very good chance that come January next year, we're going to start the year with one of the lowest inventories for the housing market that we've seen in a long time. Okay, so buyers, what does this market mean for you? Well, you can pretty much go back to the last couple episodes I've done on the market update and get the same information, because it really unfortunately hasn't changed much for you. We're still in an extremely hot seller's market. So it means that many of the properties that you're placing offers on are going to have multiple offers on them. So your biggest advantage right now is the lowest interest rates we've ever seen. So even though they've been creeping up over the last week and a half, they're still hovering around 3%, which historically is still the lowest that we've ever seen. So if you take a look at this graph up here, this shows you your average payment based on a $300,000 home. So unfortunately for Orange County, you could probably double that and get a more realistic payment amount on what you can expect your payments to be. But you can kind of see over the decades what the different interest rate would get you in terms of what your monthly payment's going to be. And you can really see that your money has never gone farther. So even if you have to bid $5,000, $10,000 above what the market value of the home is, if you're going to be in that home long term and you can secure the lowest interest rates we've seen in a long time, you're going to save a lot of money over the life of that loan. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure you're still staying after it. You're still going out, putting offers in. You just need to make sure you're doing it quickly as soon as it hits the market to give yourself the best shot. Okay, so on the other hand, sellers, what does this market mean for you? So yes, we're in an extremely hot seller's market right now. So if you put your house up for sale, you will have an advantage over the buyer because inventory is so low. However, there are two things you need to keep in mind. So one, you need to make sure that you understand that right now demand has most likely peaked for the year. So as the weeks and months go on, as kids go back to school, as fall gets closer, demand will continue to drop week after week as we go through the holiday season. So if you want to make sure you're taking advantage of every ounce of demand that you can, if you don't already have your house on the market, you need to get it on the market as soon as you can to make sure you're giving yourself the best shot at selling it for the highest price. The second thing to remember, and I see this happen, and it's a mistake that happens often with sellers, is because it's such a hot seller's market, you think you can just put whatever price you want on the house and it will sell because buyers are climbing over each other trying to get into a house right now. You need to price your house at fair market value. If you do not do that, buyers are still smart enough to know that you overpriced your house and your house is going to end up sitting on the market. You're going to have to do price reductions. And all in all, you're going to end up netting less at the end after everything is said and done than you would have if you just priced it at fair market value to begin with. So some data that we recently found to back this up was from Stephen Thomas, who's an Orange County economist. He analyzed the month of June and people that had their house for sale that had to do price reductions. And this is what he found. So over the month of June, any seller that did a price reduction of anywhere from 1% to 4% ending up selling their house. It took 35 days longer on average and ended up selling it for about 97.3% of the price they already lowered it to. So in terms of their original price, it ended up being sold for about 94.8% of the original price. Now that, on the other hand, if you priced your home correctly the first time, it obviously sold faster, but it also sold for 94.4% of the original asking price on average. So if you look at those two, the difference is 4%. And when you're looking at the average price of the house for this analysis around $750,000. That 4% really adds up to a lot of money that you could be missing out on if you don't price your home correctly. So it's extremely important that you're looking at the most recent comps. Yes, you can price on the higher side of comps because the market is hot right now, but you need to make sure you stay realistic with the price and not just offer a sky-high price and hope someone's going to buy it, because in the end, it's going to take longer and you're going to end up making less from it than if you would have just priced it correctly the first time. Okay, so before we wrap things up today, I do want to talk about the whole forbearance and foreclosure issue, because even though I've talked about it before, there's always new data and I always see it in the news cycles almost every single day. So I just want to make sure you're staying updated on what's actually going on with forbearance and foreclosures so you can make better informed decisions. So let's start with forbearance first. We'll talk about where we are right now, and then we'll talk about how that could possibly lead to any kind of housing crash, which you often hear in the headlines, where you're going to have a giant wave of foreclosures coming, which is going to dramatically drive down the prices of homes. So let's start with forbearance. So forbearance right now, there's about 4 million people currently in forbearance, which represents about 7.5% of all the mortgages out there. So it's not a giant chunk of mortgages, but it's still a significant amount of mortgages. 7.5% is not a small number when you're talking about 4 million people. So out of that 7.5%, 90% of those people have more than 10% equity in their house. So why is that important? Well, if they go back to the bank and they can't work out a deal with them during the forbearance process, where they're either putting the payments on the back end or they're making it up some other way, and if they have to be forced to sell their house, they're going to sell their house, but they're not going to be losing money. So they're going to be placing their home on the market at market value. And because interest rates are so low right now, they are going to be in a hot seller's market, getting multiple offers, and are most likely going to be coming out ahead. So 90% of those people that are in active forbearance right now, if they were forced to sell their homes today, they would have money in their house and be able to pull it out once they sell their home and not lose any money. So the other thing to really note about that as well is, because we're in such a hot seller's market, we've been building appreciation over the last few months, and we're projected to continue to have appreciation for the remainder of the year. So as that appreciation continues, you're going to have more and more people with more than that 10% equity stake in their house, and have less and less issues with people having to go into the process of foreclosure, where they have to sell it to the bank and then the bank has to sell it for a loss. So there's only a fraction amount of people that could get into trouble and that will have to eventually sell their house as a foreclosure. So that will happen. You will have a little blip in the radar in terms of people coming through the market with those foreclosed properties. But the way everything is set up right now, people can apply for that forbearance to not really take effect, and they can't really be forced to sell their house for anywhere from 6 months to a year right now. So the earliest you're going to see this little blip on the radar is going to be sometime maybe spring all the way through next fall. And because they're going to be spread out, you're really not going to see a giant impact on the housing market unless something significantly changes. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because this is really not 2008. You're not going to have a giant amount of people going into active foreclosure and having to sell their home for a loss and driving down the prices of homes. The market fundamentals just don't support that. They're completely different than they were back when 2008, when the first housing crash happened. So that's something to really consider, is that you hear a lot of people talk about all these foreclosures are going to be coming on the market next year. And yes, there will be an uptick in foreclosures, but it's not going to be a significant amount based on the data that we have right now that's really going to impact the housing market. Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, of course, you're going to be optimistic about the market. You're a real estate agent. So 2 things I have to say about that. One, if you've watched my past episodes, you know that I base my information off of data and not just how I'm feeling. But 2, there are some legitimate concerns I do have about the housing market, especially in the next couple months, and especially if we don't do things correctly over the next couple months. So the first one that I can see becoming an issue is rapid appreciation. So right now, because demand is so high for homes and we're having those multiple offers on a lot of homes, we're seeing prices driven up very quickly. Really, the only thing keeping prices in check at this point is when the appraiser goes out there, they're not appraising the property at the amount that the buyer has it in escrow for. So if the buyer can't make up the difference in whatever the appraisal value is versus what they offered, then they have to lower the price. So without those appraisals, I think we would be having an even faster appreciation going on the market, which could lead to a real estate bubble and prices coming back down once we start getting out of this pandemic. So the second thing that I am a little bit concerned about is the unemployment rate. So obviously unemployment is very high right now. Now, if you think about unemployment, you're thinking, okay, well, if someone doesn't have a job, they obviously can't pay for their mortgage, which means they're going to eventually go into foreclosure. So there is one thing about this that I do have some optimism about, which is one, most of the people that are currently unemployed, a large portion of them are going to be in the renter profile. So the people that are going to be under the age of 24 that aren't really homeowners to begin with. So a lot of it has to do with the rental side of things. However, just because they're renters, that doesn't mean the housing market won't be impacted. Because if renters can't pay their rent, then obviously the landlords aren't getting that income, which that income usually pays for their mortgage. So if they can't pay their mortgage, then eventually they could go into foreclosure as well. So again, even though most of those landlords are going to have enough equity in their house to be able to sell it for a profit, so you're not going to see a giant wave of them hitting the market at a fire sale price, you are going to see an uptick of inventory hitting the market. And then needless to say as well, if they're evicting a bunch of people because they can't pay, then you're going to have another whole issue with homelessness that's going to be going on. That's a whole separate topic on top of those people selling their homes. So the biggest X factor really here in terms of how this is going to play out is really going to have to do with Congress. So if Congress doesn't give any help to renters who can't pay their rent, then those are going to become more of an issue as we go forward. So that's really the biggest thing you want to watch is when Congress finally comes back and starts putting some more policies in place and some more relief in place. If they don't have anything set aside for renters to help them pay the rent, and they continue to not have anything set aside for renters, then it's become more and more of an issue where you're going to see more and more homes go up for sale next year, as well as more and more homeless. So that's the biggest thing for you to watch if you want to see how this whole housing is going to impact the market, is what Congress does when they come back. If they give some relief to the renters, most likely you're not going to have any issues come next year. Even with appreciation happening, even with that blip of foreclosures happening, I don't see a dramatic price drop because of something like that. But if they don't give any kind of relief to those renters, then you might see something in the market happen next year where you start seeing a couple percentage drops in the value of homes. It's not going to be a 40% drop like it was in 2008, but you are going to see some percentage come off homes. Now, if you bought a home right now, most likely you're going to have a couple percentage of appreciation happening the rest of the year, so most likely you'll be okay still. But those people that are going to be buying towards the end of the year, if something happens where the prices drop a few percent at the beginning of the year, and then they need to sell their house quickly, those are the people that are going to have issues. But if you're purchasing a house and you're purchasing it for the long term, 5 to 15 years, you're going to be able to ride out any kind of bumps that you have in that market come next year, and going to be able to end up having some equity in your house. So that's the biggest thing for you as a buyer is you need to, one, watch what Congress does. Two, you need to make sure that when you're purchasing for long term. So you want to make sure when you buy a house, you're planning on staying there for 5, 10, 15 years, and that's going to help you ride out any of these bumps and dips that we see over the coming years. Okay, so that wraps up the August housing update. So I hope you got some valuable information out of that and a better understanding of what's going on in the current market and how the next couple months is probably going to play out so you can make a more informed decision whether you're buying or selling. So until next month, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you found this podcast useful, please hit subscribe and leave a review below. I'd really appreciate it. And if you have any family or friends that want some more information about buying or selling a home or just want to stay updated on the Orange County housing market, please share it with them. It'd mean the world to me. Thanks.